The 2024 college football season and Georgia football season is going to go down as one of the most memorable. And for Georgia, it will go down as one of the most memorable and frustrating seasons in recent memory and just, in history, right? Because the reality of this program is that it has high expectations, and those expectations are to, at the very minimum, compete for championships and compete for national championships. It qualified for that this season. And when you think about everything that happened and that this team in this season and this environment won the SEC championship, it's really, really impressive. I kind of want to just look, it's fresh. This is, got back from New Orleans last night. So this is the first video I'm making since we've returned from the trip. So what I want to do is just let's just brain dump this season real quick and get it all out there. We'll almost use this as a therapeutic session to just talk about this season, because this was I started with Dawg Post in 2020. I wasn't credentialed to a lot of things in 2020 because of COVID, but so this was in terms of full football coverage where I'm there from start to finish and I'm there at everything. This is my fourth full season, but I've been around for 5 seasons doing this and covering it. Been covering college football for a little bit longer than that, and so I've been around for this change, and y'all have been here with me for a big transition in college football, and we don't know what Georgia's going to look like in the future. Dean talks a lot about how we're at a moment in time, and you know what's happened before, and you know what's happening at the moment, but you don't really know what's going to happen in the future, and so we don't know where we are, right? A couple years ago, we were talking about potential dynasty. Now, you can't say that yet, and it would take a lot more for that to happen, right? I mean, a three-peat would have changed that. Winning this year would have changed that, but that's not happening. And this Georgia season was I try not to use cliches, but it was a roller coaster. It was all over the place, and it's memorable. And in this college football, as I was last year, I'm worried about maybe this season not being remembered for how special it was in a lot of ways, and just how great college football has kind of been. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post, talking about Georgia's season. I want to recap. I want to go through this, and maybe this is more for me than it is for y'all, just kind of going through what happened this year. Because when I think about that first game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium against Clemson, that feels like it was a very long time ago, and quite literally it was at the end of August, right? And we're in January now, so there's been a few full months that have gone by since that game. It's been a long time. And Georgia opens the season as a top team and the favorite to win it all, or one of the favorites to win it all. I can't quite remember. I think Ohio State might have had the best odds to win it all at the beginning of the season. It was between Ohio State and Georgia. And the first half, you're like, hey, wow, this Georgia team just has no fire, especially on the offensive side of the ball. It just doesn't have fire. What we didn't know was that was going to be a theme, right, for that first half. Because in the second half, Georgia dominated Clemson, and they adjusted, and I think they won the second half 28-0, or 28-3. I'm blanking now on if Clemson had their field goal in the first or second half, because it was a long time ago. And you saw Georgia, a lot of new weapons score. You saw Nate Frazier score a touchdown. You saw Colby Young score a touchdown. London Humphrey score. Cash Jones score. You saw some new weapons score. And you thought, okay, well, this, they've got a lot of guys that are going to contribute. And that was the case, but not going to contribute in an elite way, because at the end of the day, this team did not have the offensive firepower necessary and struggled on the defensive side of the ball enough times. Now, I think the defense was very, very good. Tennessee Tech is kind of a whatever game, but it's not as hot as it could have been. Then you move on, and we go up to Lexington, and it's week 3. It's September 14th, and night game up in Lexington. There's a lot of night games this season. Another theme of this season that feels like it was such a long time ago. But they go up to Kentucky, and they struggle again on offense. And to me, now we're looking at, it's been 12 quarters of football, and Georgia struggled on offense for half of that, more than half of that, when there's 3 games to go. So early on, we knew that there were issues with this team, specifically with putting the ball in the end zone and moving the ball down the field. Turnovers weren't a problem at this juncture yet. And Georgia claws out and beats Kentucky 13-12, and it's an ugly game. It's an ugly game. For me, I'm dealing with. I think that was the last game that I had my crutches for. If you remember, I tore my meniscus over the summer, so I've been dealing with things on my own, and it made this season very difficult for me. And it's part of why it's like, man, I can't believe that was such a long time ago. And for me, I was on crutches for those first few games, so my memory of it's a little bit jaded. Then you go on, and the Alabama games happens, and that was arguably the game of the year. Right, I think a lot of people are calling that the game of the year. It happens September 28th in a top 5 matchup at night between Georgia and Alabama. It happens a long time ago. And when you're watching that game, you're like, man, is this going to be an SEC championship rematch? Man, is Alabama the best team in college football? Oh, well, Georgia, they overcame the turnovers from Carson Beck, and they came back, and Georgia was actually winning in that game, in the game of the year. And then they lose. Ryan Williams and Jalen Milroe make that spectacular play. Alabama gets a turnover off of Georgia on a game-winning / tying drive attempt, and the Tide win that football game. And it's dramatic. And at this point, it's an early loss, and you think, okay, well, this Georgia team, this is going to be tough. And they just lost to an Alabama team. They got out-coached for the most part by an Alabama team. But to me, it seemed like Georgia was better than Alabama as a team. I just thought, okay, I think this team's better moving forward. It ended up being true, right? Because Alabama goes on to struggle, and it kind of shows how this season was crazy. Alabama goes on, and they lose to Vanderbilt. They lose to Oklahoma. They get embarrassed by Oklahoma out there at Norman, and it just showed you how crazy this season was going to be in college football and unprecedented. As much as I was kind of against the 12-team playoff, and I thought 4 was fine, and I thought that really 6 or 8 would have been a great consolation prize for me for expansion. I thought that was a better number. But look, I'm not going to complain about a lot of games and there being 12 teams. I just don't know if it's the best model for the sport. What it did create was a regular season, and this is partially with the transfer portal, NIL, and things getting changed and people moving around a lot and talent being distributed a little bit more evenly throughout the country. But that combined with, hey, you can eat a loss or 2 in the regular season and still go on and win the national championship because of this playoff. It's made the regular season more entertaining and chaotic, and hopefully that trend continues, because for the sport, I think it's really good. For Georgia's sake, look, it's not going to be able to dominate this. I'm going to talk about that. This is another take for another time, but I don't know if Georgia can dominate the way it has grown accustomed to. I think that things will have to be adjusted. Something that Clemson has struggled to do. Georgia might have to do some adjusting and some looking inward. But going back to just going through this thing, Alabama, you think, hey, okay, Georgia didn't run the ball well. Georgia turned the ball over. They had to come back. It's crazy that they showed that they can do this. Then, solid win against Auburn, solid win against Mississippi State at home. But on the defensive side of the ball, you saw, okay, well, a little bit vulnerable. But still, you're putting up 41 points. You're winning an SEC game. And then Georgia they go to Texas. And this trip was big. Another game of the year type of trip. Another top 5 matchup at night between 2 SEC schools. This time Texas and Georgia. Maybe a rivalry that's going to be started here. And it was a crazy game. And Georgia just absolutely shuts down Texas. An offense that had looked like the best offense in college football up to that point. Don't we remember that? That Texas was, this is the best defense and offense in college football. And Georgia goes and they shut their offense down for the most part, right? And they score a couple touchdowns later in the game, but force all sorts of turnovers. Georgia's offense struggles itself. There is a call that gets reversed, an unprecedented pass interference call that gets reversed, and then people start throwing trash all over the place. Another, image of this season. We're not going to do a book, right? The books happen after the Dogs win the championship. And so that's not going to happen, but to me, I want us to put together some sort of photo collage of the season, and maybe I'll get Dean to work on that, because I think there were so many images throughout the year that just is like, yeah, that's a moment that you're just never going to forget because of how all over the place and memorable the season was. I didn't even mention that we had to deal with the security in the Alabama game, and it took us hours to get into that game because of President-elect Donald Trump being there. Just to go back to that. So then that Texas win happens, and all of a sudden, Georgia's one of the couple best teams in the country again. And people have faith in the Dogs again. And Kirby's talking about how people are doubting them. We were doubting them. because they had looked inconsistent and this team was not as good. And then they struggle, but still beat Florida by a couple touchdowns. Then you go to Ole Miss and just get kind of thumped in a way, just shut down offensively, more so than anything else. They lose that game. The field gets rushed. I was involved in the field storming. The field was stormed on me. And so that's just another thing where it's like, wow, that's, another huge moment in this season. Then something that will be forgotten is a top 10 win against Tennessee at home this season. To me, that's something that might get forgotten a little bit. Kind of moved to the side a little bit. Beat UMass. It was the only time they had a 100-yard rusher. Nate Frazier putting up 136 yards on the ground that day. Shows you the problems Georgia had on offense. Carson Beck. Look, it was an offense that wasn't good enough. It was an offense that did not help Carson Beck out. And Carson Beck was not elite enough to overcome those things, is my take on it. 8 overtime game against Georgia Tech. We're running back and forth end zone to end zone. And what's going to happen? It goes to 8 overtimes after Georgia was down by 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter and was down 17-3 at halftime, something like that, down 14 or 17 at halftime. And they beat Georgia Tech in Athens at night on Black Friday night, another abnormality that we saw in this season. And then they play Texas in a rematch in the SEC Championship game. This team that somehow got into the SEC Championship game because of what happened a couple weeks prior with teams losing left and right. And they get in, and Carson Beck gets hurt on the last play. Gunnar Stockton, who's barely played any college football, goes in there. They do well enough. Georgia wins in overtime. And Carson Beck is the one that gives the game-winning handoff. And then we go to New Orleans, and there's a freaking terrorist attack that you guys have heard what I've had to say about that, and I'm about to get choked up thinking about what happened that week while we were down there. But the Dogs lose, and it was a season that was extremely memorable. It was crazy. You could write a book about it. I don't think we're going to do that, but you could totally write a book about this. I just don't know how many people would want to buy it. And this college football season has been special in a lot of ways for Georgia. They will need to adjust some things going forward if they want to go back to what was going on a couple years ago, dominating teams. It might not be. Look, they're going to have to pay up. They're going to have to really recruit through the transfer portal. Things have to change. But I just wanted to recap this college football season because it was a hell of a ride. And I'm glad you guys were here with us. Stick with us every day. We're not going away. All right? Thanks for watching.